A young boy stood alone in the middle of a busy schoolyard, surrounded by the noise of kids laughing, chatting, and running about. But for him, there was no joy in the air. For weeks, he had been the target of harsh words and cruel jokes, all because he didn't quite fit in. His clothes weren't new, his shoes were scuffed, and he rarely spoke. That was enough for some to decide he didn't belong. The other students watched, some pretending not to see, others whispering to each other, but never stepping forward to help. The boy's eyes stayed on the ground, his hands clutching the straps of his worn-out backpack. He looked like he was waiting for it to end, but it never did. Not until someone unexpected walked into his life. That someone was Barron Trump. He wasn't there to draw attention to himself or make a scene. In fact, most people wouldn't have noticed him at first. But he noticed everything. He saw the boy standing there, the way the group circled around him, and the way no one dared to step in. For a moment, it seemed like Barron was just another bystander, someone who might quietly observe before moving on. But what happened next changed everything. Barron didn't raise his voice, he didn't call anyone out. Instead, he walked directly toward the group and did something no one expected. He stood beside the boy, not as a celebrity or someone looking to play the hero, but as another human being who saw something wrong and refused to stay silent. What he said next stopped the bullying on the spot and set off a series of events that would completely change the boy's future. This is not just a story about standing up to bullying, it's about the ripple effect of one act of kindness. It's about how one moment of courage can inspire others to do the same. But it's also a story about what happens when someone refuses to ignore the struggles of another, no matter how small or unnoticed they may seem. Before we get into what happened after that moment, I want to say thank you for being here and supporting stories like this. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I always love hearing from you. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, like, and share this video. Stories like this deserve to be heard, and with your help, we can spread a message of hope and courage to even more people. His name was Alex, a boy with a soft voice and an even softer presence. He wasn't the kind of student who drew attention to himself. In fact, he tried his best to stay out of the way. But sometimes, being quiet and different was all it took to make him a target. Alex came from a family that worked hard just to get by. His shoes had seen better days, his clothes were hand-me-downs, and his lunch was often something simple packed with love, but it never seemed to matter to those who mocked him. Each day, Alex walked into school with the same uneasy feeling in his chest, knowing what awaited him. The hallway whispers, the sneers from a distance, and the loud laughs that always seemed to echo just a little louder when they were directed at him. By the time he reached his desk, the damage was already done. He would sit quietly, keeping his head low, trying to stay invisible. But as much as he wanted to disappear, the bullies always found him. It wasn't just the words they used, it was the way they made him feel small, as though he didn't belong. They poked fun at his belongings, his demeanor, even the way he walked. By the end of the school day, Alex often found himself trudging home with his head down, replaying the cruel moments over and over in his mind. He didn't tell his parents. He didn't tell his teachers. He didn't tell anyone. Why would he? Who would even care? For Alex, it wasn't just about the bullying, it was the silence around him. The other kids who watched but said nothing, the adults who seemed too busy to notice, and the sinking feeling that maybe this was just how things would always be for him. He felt trapped in a cycle he couldn't break. But let me ask you this, how often do we see someone struggling and look the other way? How many times do we convince ourselves it's not our problem, or that someone else will step in? The truth is, most people think just that. And for Alex, it seemed like no one would ever have the courage to do something different. That's where Barron Trump comes in. His entrance into Alex's life wasn't loud or showy. It wasn't the kind of moment anyone would predict. It was quiet, almost unnoticed at first. But what Barron did that day wasn't just about standing up to bullies, it was about seeing someone who felt invisible and making sure they knew they weren't alone. And as for Alex, what happened next changed everything. Have you ever thought about what you'd do if you saw someone like Alex? Someone who needed help but didn't know how to ask for it? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to know your story, too. That day was supposed to be an ordinary event, a moment for the school to showcase its efforts in supporting students from all walks of life. Barron Trump and his mother, Melania Trump, were there as part of a broader initiative to encourage students to dream big, no matter their circumstances. It was a day filled with smiles, handshakes, and speeches, but in the background, something caught Barron's attention. While most people were focused on the main event, Barron's eyes wandered toward the schoolyard. There, among the clusters of students, he noticed something that didn't sit right. A boy stood in the middle of a group, his shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on the ground. The kids around him weren't just playing, they were shouting, pointing, and laughing. The scene was unmistakable. Alex was being mocked, again. And this time, it was in plain view of everyone. Barron didn't rush. He didn't draw attention to himself. But his expression shifted, calm yet deliberate, as if he had already made up his mind about what needed to happen next. The adults around seemed hesitant, unsure whether to step in or let the scene play out. Some whispered to each other, but no one moved. The crowd of students watching did what most crowds do. They stayed quiet, frozen in the uncomfortable space between wanting to help and fearing the consequences of getting involved. And here's the question we've all asked ourselves at some point. When you see someone being treated unfairly, do you step forward or do you stay silent? It's not an easy decision. Many people weigh the risks, wondering if they'll make things worse or if their efforts will even matter. But Barron didn't seem to hesitate. He didn't wait for permission or look around to see who else might act. Instead, he began walking toward the group with a quiet confidence that immediately shifted the atmosphere. The noise started to die down as Barron approached, but the tension remained thick. The bullies, sensing something was different, began to pull back slightly, unsure of what to expect. Barron wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. He simply stood there, close enough to Alex that it became clear he wasn't just an observer anymore. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have had the courage to step into the middle of a situation where everyone else stayed silent? These are the moments that define us, not because they're easy, but because they demand something we often hold back: bravery, empathy, and action. And what Barron did next wasn't just about stopping the bullying, it was about showing Alex, and everyone else watching, that silence is never the answer. Stay with me, because the story only gets more powerful from here. And if you're watching this right now, take a moment to reflect. What would you do if you saw someone like Alex? Barron didn't hesitate as he stepped into the circle. His presence was commanding, but not in an intimidating way. He didn't shout, didn't point fingers, he simply walked right up to the group and stopped a few steps away from Alex. For a moment, there was an uneasy silence. The bullies looked at him, unsure of what to expect. The crowd shifted, some standing on their toes to see what was happening, others whispering to each other in surprise. Then Barron spoke, his voice calm yet firm. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, addressing the bullies directly. His tone wasn't accusatory, but there was an undeniable weight to his words. "What has he done to deserve this from you?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. The bullies exchanged glances, their bravado faltering under the unexpected confrontation. Barron didn't let the silence linger too long. "Do you think this makes you stronger?" he continued, his gaze steady and unwavering. "It doesn't. Real strength isn't about tearing someone down to feel better about yourself. It's about lifting others up, even when no one else does." The impact of his words was immediate. The laughter and mocking had completely stopped. The bullies, who moments earlier had been so loud and confident, seemed unsure of themselves now. The crowd, which had been a passive audience to the scene, began to stir. A few students stepped forward, some toward Alex, others standing closer to Barron as if silently showing their support. For Alex, it was a moment he would never forget. Just minutes ago, he had felt entirely alone, surrounded by hostility. Now, the dynamic had shifted. He wasn't just the boy being bullied anymore. He was someone who mattered, someone worth standing up for. And yet, Barron wasn't done. Turning back to Alex, he spoke softly enough that only those close by could hear. "You don't deserve any of this," he said. "Don't let their words make you believe otherwise." It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. Barron's willingness to stand up, his ability to address the situation without anger or aggression, and his choice to acknowledge Alex as more than just a victim, it all left a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed it. Now, let me ask you something. How often do we see someone being treated unfairly and think, "It's not my place to get involved"? How many times have you wanted to help but held back, unsure of what to say or do? These are the moments that test our character, and Barron's actions that day showed that courage doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet strength of standing up for what's right that makes the biggest difference. As the crowd around the schoolyard began to disperse, Barron stayed behind. He approached Alex, who still seemed overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. Instead of walking away after intervening, Barron did something unexpected. He sat down beside him. It wasn't a grand gesture or something meant to draw attention, but it spoke volumes. He asked Alex about himself, not as a formality, but out of genuine curiosity. Barron listened as Alex hesitantly opened up about his struggles, from the teasing at school to the challenges his family faced at home. It wasn't easy for Alex to talk about these things, but Barron's calm and approachable demeanor made it feel safe. This was more than just a conversation. It was the first time in a long time that Alex felt truly seen and heard. Meanwhile, Melania Trump, who had been observing from a distance, took note of the interaction. Later that day, she spoke with the school's administrators to understand more about the culture that allowed such bullying to persist. As a mother herself, she couldn't ignore what she had witnessed. She reached out to local organizations and proposed initiatives aimed at supporting not only Alex but other students who might be facing similar situations. From anti-bullying workshops to programs that provided essential resources for struggling families, Melania's involvement turned a moment into a movement. The changes didn't happen overnight, but they were undeniable. Teachers began to take a closer look at how bullying was addressed in their classrooms. Parents became more involved, attending meetings and advocating for policies that ensured every child felt safe and supported. And the students? Many of them started to reflect on their own actions, both the hurtful and the kind. It wasn't just about stopping bullying, it was about creating an environment where kindness and understanding were the norm, not the exception. For Alex, this wasn't just about one heroic moment, it was about the chain of events that followed. Barron's decision to step in had given him the courage to speak up, not just for himself but for others who might feel isolated or powerless. The impact was far-reaching, touching not only Alex's life but the entire school community. And here's where the story becomes personal for all of us. How often do we take the time to really listen to someone's story, to understand what they're going through beyond what we see on the surface? Small acts of empathy, asking a question, offering support, speaking up when others won't, can lead to changes we may never fully realize. So, let me ask you, have you ever taken a moment to listen to someone who felt invisible? Or has someone done that for you? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how these moments have shaped your life. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stories like these remind us of the power we all have to make a difference, and there's more to come as we uncover how this small act of courage continues to echo far beyond the schoolyard. As the day came to a close, Barron wasn't finished making an impact. Before he left the school, he approached Alex one more time. This time, he wasn't just offering words, he was giving Alex something to hold onto, a token of encouragement that would stay with him long after this day ended. Quietly, without drawing attention, Barron handed Alex a folded piece of paper and a neatly packed bag filled with essentials, new notebooks, a sturdy backpack, and a few other school supplies. When Alex unfolded the note later, he found a simple message written in Barron's careful handwriting: "Never forget your worth. You are more than what others see." For Alex, this was more than just a message. It wasn't just about the bag or the supplies, though they were deeply appreciated. The note, those few words, felt like a lifeline. It was as if someone had reached into the overwhelming storm of his life and pulled him back to safety. Barron's words weren't flowery or overly dramatic. They were exactly what Alex needed to hear. They reminded him that someone believed in him, not because they had to, but because they chose to. Think about it. How often do we underestimate the power of a small gesture? A few words, a thoughtful action, can sometimes shift a person's perspective in ways we can't even imagine. For Alex, that folded piece of paper wasn't just encouragement, it was proof that his struggles hadn't gone unnoticed. And here's something to consider. When was the last time you told someone they mattered? Not out of obligation, but because you saw them for who they are and what they could be? Small moments like these don't just stay with the person receiving them, they have the potential to inspire others to pass that same kindness forward. As Alex clutched the bag and the note, something shifted inside him. The boy who had spent so many days feeling invisible now walked with a little more confidence. He wasn't just carrying new supplies, he was carrying a renewed sense of self-worth. And as he glanced back at Barron, who offered a small nod before leaving with his mother, Alex realized he had witnessed something rare, someone stepping in, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. This act of kindness wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something much larger, something that would not only change Alex's life, but leave an impression on everyone who had been watching that day. What Barron did wasn't about grand gestures or public applause, it was about making sure one person felt seen, valued, and supported. After that day, something remarkable began to change in Alex. The boy who once kept his head down, hoping to go unnoticed, started to look up. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but each step forward felt significant. In class, Alex began raising his hand, sharing answers, and engaging with his teachers in a way he hadn't before. He wasn't just going through the motions anymore, he was starting to believe he belonged. What stood out even more was his growing confidence outside the classroom. Alex, who used to sit alone during lunch breaks, began to connect with his classmates. Slowly, he started forming friendships. The once isolated boy now laughed and shared stories with others, a change that didn't go unnoticed by his peers or teachers. One day, when a local mentorship program was introduced at the school, Alex signed up. It was a bold move for someone who had spent so much of his life in the shadows. But with Barron's words still fresh in his mind, Alex was determined to make the most of every opportunity. The program paired him with a mentor who guided him not just academically, but also emotionally. With time, Alex found himself excelling in ways he hadn't thought possible. What made his growth even more powerful was his decision to give back. Recognizing the pain he had once endured, Alex started mentoring younger students who struggled with self-esteem and bullying. He would often share his story, not as a tale of victimhood, but as a testament to the power of someone believing in you when you need it most. Years later, Alex would look back on that moment in the schoolyard as the day everything changed. It wasn't just about Barron stepping in to stop the bullying, it was about the spark it ignited in him. That simple act of kindness had given him the courage to dream, to take risks, and to stand tall in the face of challenges. This transformation wasn't just visible in Alex. The entire school felt different in the months that followed. Students seemed more aware of each other, teachers paid closer attention to the dynamics in their classrooms, and parents began having conversations with their kids about empathy and respect. Now, let's pause for a moment to reflect. Think about the people in your life who have made you feel seen or heard during difficult times. How did that change you? Or, consider this, when was the last time you took the time to encourage someone else, even in the smallest way? These moments may seem ordinary, but for someone like Alex, they can be life-changing. As Alex continued to grow into the confident young man he had become, he never forgot the day everything changed. One evening, after reflecting on how far he'd come, Alex decided to put his thoughts into words. Sitting at his desk, he carefully wrote a letter addressed to Barron Trump. It wasn't just a thank you note, it was a deeply personal expression of how much that moment in the schoolyard had meant to him. In his letter, Alex wrote, "You didn't just stand up for me that day, you showed me that I mattered. You gave me the strength to believe in myself again. Because of you, I've started to see a future where I can help others the way you helped me." I hope one day I can make as much of a difference in someone's life as you made in mine." Barron, upon receiving the letter, was moved by its sincerity. But true to his character, he didn't seek any acknowledgement for his actions. For him, stepping in that day wasn't about recognition, it was about doing what felt right. His choice to stand by Alex was a reflection of his belief that everyone deserves dignity and respect, regardless of their circumstances. Barron's actions reminded everyone watching that kindness and bravery aren't defined by age, status, or background. It's about seeing someone in need and choosing to act, even when it might be easier to stay silent. Melania Trump's involvement also played a pivotal role in amplifying the impact. She didn't stop at addressing Alex's immediate challenges, she worked to create long-term change within the school. Her collaboration with local organizations brought much-needed resources to students who had been struggling in silence. Beyond the material support, she fostered a culture where students were encouraged to stand up for one another, where kindness wasn't just an ideal but a practice woven into the fabric of daily life. The story of Alex and Barron became more than just a moment in time, it became an example of what's possible when compassion meets action. The school wasn't just a safer place for Alex, it had transformed into a community where students learned the value of standing together, of lifting each other up when it mattered most. And now, let's turn the spotlight on you. Have you ever received a gesture of kindness that changed the way you see yourself or the world? Or have you ever been in a position to help someone and wondered what difference it might make? These are the moments that define us, not by the size of the act, but by the heart behind it. If this story has touched you, take a moment to share it. Your voice has the power to inspire someone else, just like Barron's actions inspired Alex. And if you've stayed with us this far, thank you for believing in stories that remind us of the best in humanity. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be shared far and wide. This story shows us something truly important, that one thoughtful action can create a chain of events far greater than we can anticipate. Barron Trump's decision to stand up for Alex wasn't just about that moment in the schoolyard. It was about showing what can happen when someone takes a stand, even when it might feel easier to stay silent. It's a reminder that in our everyday lives, we all have opportunities to make an impact. Now, let me ask you, if you were in Barron's position, what would you have done? Would you have the courage to step forward, to speak up, and to show someone they are not alone? These are the questions that challenge us, not just to think about what we might do, but to actually make that choice when the time comes. If Alex's story has resonated with you, if it's reminded you of a moment when someone lifted you up or when you had the chance to make a difference, I'd love to hear your story. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. It's these conversations that bring us closer to understanding the power of kindness and connection. And before we wrap up, if this story inspired you, please take a moment to give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can share stories that remind us all of the strength that comes from compassion and courage. As we close, I leave you with this thought: the smallest gesture, whether it's a word of encouragement, a helping hand, or simply standing by someone when they need it, can change the course of someone's life. So, what will your next act of kindness be? Take a moment to think about it, and when the opportunity comes, I hope you'll take it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.